First off, did you know that people with strong personalities or charismatic personalities can easily sway public opinion and manipulate people into doing their bidding? Neither did I, and that sounds pretty relevant to me in these current times. Anyway, good day to you. We will be talking about design and how we can apply the knowledge and use it for our own success. You should all listen to what we have to say because we are reviewing important information from our textbooks that gives great information over proper graphic design. On top of that, we are college students taking a class over the theory and practice of commercial publication and desktop publishing. It is nothing less than crucial to listen. Trust me, we know what we're talking about because we've done heavy research over these two chapters as well as read over journals concerning graphic design. Now the purpose of today is for us to present chapter 13 and 14 so y'all can walk away from this presentation with enhanced skills and a sharpened designer eye. Now we will start with chapter 13, the process of designing, then we will move on to chapter 14 where we overview answers and suggestions to quizzes through the book. Lastly, we will show why all this is important to us as well as graphic design itself. First, let's talk about chapter 13, Does It Make Sense? When it comes to designing, many often do not know where to start. So it is best that we go over a step-by-step plan of how you can start so you don't feel lost and instead feel confident. The first thing you want to do is create a focal point. Think about what you want your readers to see first. Is it the logo? Is it the picture? Is it the text? Nonetheless, unless you have chosen a very concordant design, create your focal point with strong contrast. Otherwise, if your focal point blends into the rest of your document, your reader's eyes don't know where to go. We'll talk more about contrast later in the presentation. Now, moving on your next step, we'll apply proximity by putting your information into groups. In doing so, you will display the relationships between information with a closeness or lack of closeness between those groups. For instance, on the flyer about a business card, you will put your email, phone number, and address together. However, you will put that group and separate them from the group concerning services that the business offers. In contrast, putting together the wrong information will make things difficult to read for the reader, and you will have lost a business opportunity or have gotten a bad grade. Luckily, this will not be a problem anymore. Since we have used proximity, it is best to move on to creating alignment. Watch out for things like a strong edge from some text or some pictures, as you can strengthen it with alignments of other text or objects. Be wary since it is easy to make a mistake. For instance, many of us like to center our headlines and put our body copy flush left. However, this is completely wrong. So once again, be very careful as it is easy to make a mistake. Now this all may seem tedious, but it's important because these steps will help you become a designer with lots of success and very little failure. Think of them as your life vest that saves your work from death by bad design. Thank you.
Now that we've talked about these steps concerning the focal point, proximity, and alignment, we're going to discuss the second half of the process of design. We will be discussing the last two steps concerning repetition and strong contrast. The principle of repetition states, repeat some aspect of the design throughout the entire piece. A few aspects you may want to repeat include color and typeface. Repetition of these aspects brings the document together and limits the possibility of your document becoming confusing or hard to read. Repetition is simply a consistent use of a certain aspect throughout your design. Williams described this using a brochure as an example. If your brochure uses a 12-point font on pages 1 through 4, but then uses an 18-point font on page 5, the lack of consistency will be distracting and your readers may not be as invested in what you have to say. Repetition is important for single-page documents as well. The consistent use of blue and orange throughout this flyer, as well as the consistent alignment, helps guide your viewers' eyes to each important subject. But be careful not to use too much repetition in your design. If your document is all one color or all one typeface, your viewers won't be interested because they won't know what to focus on. This brings me to the rule of contrast. Contrast is the differentiation throughout your document of typefaces and colors. Contrast guides the viewer's eyes across the document with the purpose of leading them to each important section. Your viewers don't want to spend all day reading your flyer. Contrasting elements allow them to see the main ideas first, so they're able to process the information more quickly. As you can see in this flyer, the large title, Toys for Tickets, is very easy to see. This is what will catch your viewers' attention. The contrast throughout the flyer between dark and light backgrounds ensures that everything is legible and easy to focus on. Remember, contrast is what makes your design pop out to your viewer.
So now that we have gone over repetition and contrast, I'm going to go over some quizzes that were used in previous chapters, and we're going to be using our designer eye and previous knowledge of the 4 principles to improve some flyers. So the first one here, we have little quiz number 1. It is talking about design principles. So in this one, what can we do different? Now, what we can see here is that everything is flush to the center, which is something that the author strongly suggests not to do. Rather, we should be doing either everything be flush to the left or flush to the right. So how can we improve this using the principles? Well, now you can see that all the text is flush to the right. Now we have a little bit more contrast. For example, here we have a black box right behind white text, and now everything is, you can read it very well, and the information is not grouped well together. Now we have little quiz number 2. We're going to be redesigning this ad. At first glance, you can see straight away everything is flush to the center. And there's also capital letters used for the body of the text. And everything seems to be blending together, and there's not really great use of the images here. It could be because it's very small. And there is no contrast. So how can it be improved? Well, now we have here the new design. He had added a color instead of white. Now we use contrast by using another colored box right behind white text. He removed unnecessary information from the flyer. He also removed the all caps from the text, because you should only be using this when you're doing your title or heading. We also have everything flushed to the right and the left, but it's okay because we have that center in the middle of alignment. Now next we have little quiz number 3. This is where we're going to be talking about the color wheel. So analogous means when the colors are right next to each other on the color wheel. This is probably, for example, pink and purple, or yellow and green. Complementary colors are the ones that are from the opposite ends of the color wheel. For example, yellow and blue, or red and blue, green and pink. Those go really well together. Tint is when you are using white. So when you go to the center of the color wheel, you are using a tint. But you are using a shade when you're going darker and you're going more towards the outside of the color wheel. Now, CMYK is when you are using a color setting for printing only. It looks much better when you're printing, while RGB is best used when you are using things that are going to be seen on websites and on the internet. Now, little quiz number 4, although you want your design to look pretty, you also want the words in your design to be spelled correctly and using proper grammar and punctuation. So here we're going to be talking about apostrophes. For example, it's is it is with an apostrophe, while it's without an apostrophe is a possessive form of it. For example, here we have it's my birthday. For this, you're using the shorter version of it is. If you were to not use the apostrophe, you would say it is my birthday, but it would also sound good with an apostrophe, it's my birthday. Now, if you were to say a car is no good without its motor or wheels, you would not use an apostrophe at all because it is not possessive. In a way that I use to know what's right or wrong, just if it makes sense, if the sentence makes sense using it is, then I would use the apostrophe. But now we're going to be over our next point.
So now that we've discussed the 4 main principles of design and have begun to use our designer eye, let's discuss some design do's and don'ts and test you on what you think is right or wrong in each scenario. So to test you, I'm going to read out a statement about design, and your job is to use the information that you've gathered throughout this presentation to determine whether or not these are things that you would want to do or not want to do. So the first statement is going to be, add importance to one typographic element by making it bolder and to another on the same page by making it bigger. So is this something that you would want to do or not want to do? So this is something that you wouldn't want to do, and the reason is, when you emphasize multiple different things on a page, such as text in an image or a document, what ends up happening is that those two things clash and fight each other for dominance, and your page just ends up looking less cohesive and generally not very good. So what you would want to do instead is to determine what is the most important element between the 1 or 2 or 3 and emphasize just that one thing. So the next statement is, use 2 scripts on one or on the same page. Is it something that you would want to do or not want to do? So this is something that you wouldn't want to do either, And the reason is scripts typically look very similar to one another. And the problem with this is that it's going to be really hard to differentiate between different bodies of text when you're using scripts at the same time. So instead, what you would want to do is to use two faces from two different categories of type. That way there's a better contrast and you can differentiate the bodies of text. And so finally, the last statement is, if one face is tall and slender, choose another face that is short and thick. So how does this sound? Well, this is something that you would want to do, and the reason is differentiating the face types like this creates a nice contrast in structure and color, and that's going to end up being really appealing to the audience or the reader's eye. So those are the three statements, and it's really important to recognize that things as little as text or color can really change a design. They make a really big impact. So to be able to recognize those things as a designer can distinguish you between a novice and somebody who's really trained. So finally, we'll be discussing how these different elements of design tie into one another in the next slides.
Hey everyone, my name is Andrea and I'm going to be discussing how we use all four of the design principles that my group members have already spoken on, how we use them simultaneously, and how we as designers will rarely ever use them individually. So I'm going to be showing you this example that UTSA created and UTSA used last fall. This flyer was used when students were allowed to pay off half of their citations with donated toys. So with this flyer, we're going to identify the proximity, the alignment, the repetition, and the contrast. So first, we're going to talk about the proximity. We use these dotted lines to show you the different groups of text that the designer used. So you can see clearly how the headline is on top, the text is in the middle, and then contact information and graphics are at the bottom. With these text boxes being grouped together, it shows that they're related. It allows the reader to see that this information goes together. It's an effective use of space, and it creates a very organized look for the flyer, which makes it easier to read. So next we're going to talk about the alignment. Again, you can see with the dotted lines that we put on the sides, the vertical lines, that this is how all of the text boxes are aligned, and it allows a visual connection for the reader. It doesn't only unify the entire flyer, but it organizes all of the text boxes in a way that makes it easier for the reader to read. And then we're going to talk about repetition. With the arrows, you can see a little bit of what your eye is supposed to see with the use of repetition. The repetition in this flyer is the colors. You can see the different orange, the same orange throughout the flyer, the navy blue and the light gray. You can see the same type of fonts in the flyer, which create consistency, and it's just visually interesting for the reader. And a special tip with repetition is highly, highly important when used with a one-page design, simply because you just really want to attract the reader and show the reader that the entire flyer or the entire design is cohesive. And then lastly, we're going to talk about contrast. With contrast, this is very clear with this flyer because the background is such a completely different color than everything else. So contrast, no matter in what design, it creates emphasis and it clearly just attracts the reader. So overall, with this example, UTSA did a very good job with including all four of the principles, and it was very, very effective with the student body. And it is just very important to remember that we will use all four of the principles simultaneously, and if you don't, then you really need to think about your design again, because the four principles are really just to create a successful design and attract the reader. So now I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to conclude this presentation.
Now that we've been able to discuss the tips found in Chapter 13, as well as the extra practice questions found in Chapter 14, I hope you're all able to grasp the concepts that make a good graphic designer. By focusing on the key design principles of focal point, proximity, alignment, repetition, and contrast, your design will be smoother than ever. But as you can see by the multiple practice questions that we provided in this presentation, the process requires a lot of practice to become a habit. So as a quick reminder, the focal point is the main section you want your viewers to see. Proximity is the principle of grouping like items together. Alignment keeps your page organized. Repetition is the repeating of certain elements for consistency. And of course, contrast helps draw your viewers' attention. By using all of these steps together, your design process will be amazing. As these steps become a habit, your designs will become more enticing and it will catch everyone's attention. Soon, your charismatic and dominant designs may even get you a following. Thank you for listening, and keep on designing.